Angie Homley-Zabo here. Today I'm going to teach you some basic ceramics techniques. It's really important when you're working in a medium to understand the basic tools and techniques that are available to you so that whatever ideas that you have in your head you can make in front of you. So two of the basic construction techniques that we use in clay are slab and coil. So I'm going to make a video for each. In the first video I'm going to show you how to create a slab vessel. In the second video, I'm going to show you how to make a coil vessel. I've combined both those techniques in this example that I use with my students. The part that you see through here, this flat sheet, is slab. You can see it goes around to the back. The base is slab. And then we used coil both as a structural element here to build it up, but also decoratively. So moving the coil in different ways. And on the base, we also use coil on the surface to create some interest, along with some piercings. So the first technique I'm going to show you is slab, then we'll do coil, and then your job from there is to think about how you can combine those in interesting and beautiful ways. To build our slab vessel, we first have to roll slabs of clay. We do this much the same way a baker would roll a sheet of pie dough or cookie dough and then cut shapes from it. So you're going to need a rolling pin and a slat or some sort of hard tool that's going to help you make sure that you have the same thickness of your clay everywhere. The slats that I use in class are about 3/8 inch thick, so a little over a quarter, a little under a ½ inch thick. They're just pieces of wood. You will need a tool to cut with. I have a diamond tip sgraffito tool, but a knife could work just as well. You'll need a template. The template is what we use to trace and cut our slabs from. And you can see some of the slabs that I've already cut over here. I'm also going to show you one fun technique you can do with slab as well. So I have wedged clay on a canvas top table. If you don't have a canvas at home that you can roll on, you could use a piece of newspaper or something like that. And then I'm going to start rolling. When you roll your clay, I have a tendency to go in and kind of push down the clay first, so you've got a pretty flat sheet to start with. You always want to roll in the direction of your slats, and you've got to push hard. Clay is a pretty dense, tough subject, so you got to push a little bit to get that to roll out. You don't want to roll against the clay like this, because when I do that I might push too hard on the side closest to me or away from me and I'd get an uneven slab. And I want to roll until I know that my rolling pin is hitting my slats on both sides. All right, once I've rolled my slab out, I'm going to grab my templates. And for my vessel, I'm going to have a square bottom and 4 sides that are the same shape. I wanted to make sure that the measurement on the bottom of my side is the same as the bottom of the vessel. Other than that, the measurements can change. And you can do different shapes on each side. In my sample vessel, I have like kind of a fun petal cutout on the front and the back. So be creative in the way that you put your slabs together. You're just going to put your template down on your slab. Cut all the way through, one solid, nice cut. You don't want to hack at it. Then you're going to take your excess off, and you've got your slab. When you're building a slab vessel, you want your slabs to be a little bit on the stiff side when you put it together. So if you notice your slab is really wobbly to start, your clay is really wet, what I tell my students to do is put a paper towel between each slab and wrap it loosely and let it sit for a while and let some of that moisture get pulled out of it. Another fun thing that you can do with slab is to roll textures into it. So here I have a piece of clay. If I put this leaf down and then I roll over it, it'll press that texture into the clay and leave a really nice mark behind. The glaze picks up really beautifully. You can see I've already done that here with a long strip. I'm going to do that on this piece too for another piece that I'll show you. I'm going to put that together into a simple leaf vessel. Ideally, you would pre-cut the piece to the size you want, and then you would put the leaves on and then roll it on. I did not pre-cut this piece for a very specific reason, which you'll understand once I start putting this together. So that's how you roll and cut a slab. Next step is putting it together. When we're working on our vessels, we always work on a board with a paper towel on it. This helps to make sure that our pieces don't stick to the surface on which we're working. It also allows for us to move things around when we need to in a lot easier format without having to pick up the clay when it's in its wet form. When you clean up at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have all your objects on a board or something that you can carry easily. Any extra clay that maybe was left over is wrapped up with a wet paper towel so it's pliable the next time. I've got paper towels over everything, and then I've wrapped a garbage bag under my board. I'm going to pull it up over the top, pack it in tight but carefully around my objects. I don't want to knock the walls of anything down, and then I'll put it underneath the board as well. If I want to, and it's really important that my clay stay really moist, I'll wrap a second bag around it. If I'm at a point where it's better for it to start to set up and dry out a little bit, one bag is sufficient. Make sure you set your space up really nicely so that you can have good quality outcome. All right, we've got our slabs cut and we're ready to start assembling. We're going to assemble this like a box. We have the bottom, the base, and we're going to build the sides up and around it. You're going to want a tool that you can use to score the clay or scratch it. So I have this rib tool that's been serrated, a tool to apply slip, so I'm going to use a brush, and then a tool for smoothing, and I have this loop tool, but I'm going to use the wooden end to smooth. I have also rolled a variety of small coils, and I have them in wet paper towels to keep them so they're really pliable. The first thing you do when you attach two pieces of clay is you score the joint where they connect. So I'm going to score the base, and then I would do the same on my side. I want to make sure I've got the right side, so I've scored it, and then you slip. So slip is just clay and water mixed together to make kind of a goopy slurry. So I'm going to add slip on both sides. You want enough that it's going to squeeze out a little bit. Then I'm going to push it straight down and kind of jiggle it, okay, to get it to kind of stick, Velcro to itself. So I'm going to tilt the camera so you can see this seam. Next, I'm going to come in with a coil, and I want to blend that coil up into the top of my piece, up into the side, and I want it to go down into the base. And I'm just going to take off the extra coil. This will strengthen your seam. I'm going to put my hand behind to hold up my wall, and then I'm just going to use this wooden tool. And you could use your fingers for this as well, but my clay is a sculpture based clay, so it's a little bit stiffer and heavier, so I have to push a little bit more. I want to push just enough to kind of smooth that coil in. I don't want to dent my slab. Then I'll use my finger to just kind of even that out. Okay, so that's one side. Now I'm going to grab my next side. Now this is interesting because my vessel has curved sides. So if I do this here, they don't want to stick to each other, right? I'm going to have to force them to kind of curve into each other as I add the piece here. So I'm going to bring my camera up so you can see that better. Okay, so I'm going to score any place those pieces will touch. So the bottom of my piece I need to score, this edge needs to be scored, and this side of my piece here. Then I'm going to add slip. And again, we want enough that it kind of squeezes out a little bit. That gives the coil a little something to grab onto. And that last step, most students when they come to me know that they should slip and score every time they add two pieces of clay, but they miss the blending step. And the blending step is really important, especially when you're dealing with the structures. If you're adding something decoratively, you don't always need to do that blending step. But I'm going to push these pieces together. I'm going to look at the outside, tip it down for you here. I want to make sure that my seam comes together and that slip kind of pops out there. So I'm going to push that into the seam. I'm going to come inside the vessel here, and I need to add coils again. So my hand's behind the back holding on. I'm adding a coil on this seam, just pushing it in a little bit. Then I'm going to add another coil up the side. And I'm holding my hand kind of cupped behind the back so that this doesn't collapse on me and that seam stays tight. Then I'm going to use my tool. I'm going to blend down, up into the sidewall. And again, this whole time my hand is back behind that seam so this guy doesn't want to fall off. And then at a little trickier angle, especially when I have a camera in front of me, I'm going to blend in this interior seam. The excess on the top I'm going to bend around so that I can seal this top edge nicely. And then once I've blended everything in, I'm just going to come in with my finger and just really gently try to clean things up. If it's really rough, I can come back in with that wooden tool and try to clean things up a little bit. All right, now I'm just going to keep doing the same thing repeated all the way around. When you get to this last piece, I have to put this on the outside of my piece just to make it fit correctly with the rest. You might find that sometimes your measurements aren't quite what you anticipated being correct, and that's okay. Make it work. Sometimes you have to cut a little extra off here and there, but you know, just pay attention to what you have and problem solve as you get there. Make sure that every time you add a slab that you are getting good amount of slip on every single joint, that you've scored every single joint really well, and that you blend a coil into that joint. The biggest mistake or the biggest issues that my students have when they make their slab vessels is they will appear to be well constructed when they're working on them and when the clay is wet, but when the clay starts to dry out, the slabs shrink, because clay shrinks as it dries. So those slabs shrink, and then all of a sudden, those seams, which are the weak points, pop open. So make sure that you seal those seams up really good. It gets a little tricky sealing the seams when we put this last piece on, because it's a little harder to get inside the vessel. Do your very best. Some students, when they come up with a design, can't get into the vessel on the last seam with their coils. So my advice to them is to get as much in there as you can. And then we're gonna focus on the outside of the vessel and filling the seams on the outside. And for these exterior seams, if you can blend them without adding a coil, it will sometimes look a lot nicer. So what I do is I just take a tool and I just very gently move my clay over that seam in one direction and then the other. I just want to make sure that clay is moving from one side to the other. It's really truly blending from one edge to the other edge. If you've got big gaps in your seams that you need to fill it with a coil. All right? So your next step is kind of smoothing out those seams on the outside, blending all of those in, including the seam at the base and your corners, and just making sure that everything is really well blended. Do it gently, do it carefully. You don't want to gouge your slab. You want to keep that pretty nice. You might need to trim up the top of your vessel to keep it nice and even. Clearly on my vessel, I still have to finish doing the interior coils, and I have to finish blending the outside seams. But I'm going to stop there from now, and I want to show you one more slab technique. So I have here my clay piece that I rolled out with the leaves pressed into it. I've cut it into a long rectangle, and what I want to do is make this into a cylindrical vessel. So I'm going to take this end, the far end, I'm going to score, then I'm going to score on this end. I'm going to add slip to each end. Then I'm going to put those two ends together and add a coil on the inside seam. I'm going to trace that cylinder onto that bottom form. Once I've traced that form, I take my cylinder off. I'm going to use my sgraffito tool and I'm going to cut this off. All right, so I took a sponge and I cleaned up the outside of this just a little bit. You can see I was pretty careful because I didn't want to accidentally peel up some of the leaves. I spent some time cleaning up the base. I went around the tops of the leaves and I kind of cut around the edges just to vary that top ledge a little bit. And then I took my vessel and I rolled it on the table to try to even it out. It was looking a little bit rough. And by rolling it on the table, I was able to round it out a little bit more. At this point, what I need to do now is go into these cut edges that I built in here, and I'm gonna use my handy dandy handle on my sgraffito tool, and I'm just gonna take some time and clean up those edges and scrape them down. All right, I have gone in and I've smoothed out all of my seams, including the seams on the base. I'm always really careful when I'm holding my vessels to kind of cushion it lightly and treat it kindly. Some of the areas that were a little rough or not quite even, I used the side of my rib tool to kind of scrape along that surface and even it out. Then I used a sponge to kind of clean that back up. And I went around and just evened everything out, made sure everything was really well blended. Once I was done with that, my favorite smoothing tool, honestly, are just my fingers. I went in and I used my hands to just go in and kind of smooth everything that needed smoothing. I worked to shape the vessel, just gently kind of pushing it into the form I want it to be. Because once I have this in a shape today that I want it to be in, I don't want to flex it anymore. Because as this clay sets up, if I start flexing the clay or bending it, it's going to want to break, and it's going to break at your weakest points or the areas where you flex the most. So it's either going to break on my seams, or if I keep trying to move this wall, eventually it will crack right here. So I want to get this the shape that I'd like it to stay into. At this point, maybe this vessel is done. If I just want a smooth, even shape like this, my vessel could be done. I always tell my students that texture on clay is a really beautiful thing. So add some texture to this. You could carve into it, press some texture in if you support it from the inside. You could build some coils up onto it and make it interesting. You could cut shapes out of the top edge to make it more interesting. But now that you've got your basic vessel form, now you can play. So play, have fun, and see what you can make. Enjoy!